The first time I saw Edmund Hale, I was on my knees in the kitchen garden, with dirt under my fingernails and a streak of mud across my forehead that I wouldn't discover until hours later. He was standing on the gravel drive with my father, and my father was laughing. That particular laugh he reserved for men who mattered, rich and warm and entirely performed. My sister Cecily stood between them, in a dress the colour of crushed peonies, and even from 50 yards away I could see the choreography. The tilt of her chin, the placement of her hand on our father's arm, the way the light seemed to organize itself around her. I was 26. Cecily was 28. And for as long as I could remember, the family arithmetic had been simple. Cecily was the dividend, I was the remainder. My name is Margot Fairley. I managed the household accounts, supervised the tenant disputes, organized the quarterly estate reviews, and maintained the correspondence with our family solicitors. Work that kept Fairley Park functioning, but that my father attributed variously to the steward, or the accountant, or, when pressed, someone on staff. I had never been presented at a social function. I had never been introduced to a guest of consequence. When visitors came, I ate in my room or in the kitchen with Mrs. Hargrove, the cook, who had been feeding me scraps of affection since I was 9 years old, and my mother decided I was not worth the investment of a London season. I was not ugly. I want to be clear about that because the story people assume, plain sister, beautiful sister, inevitable redemption, is not this story. I was ordinary. Brown hair, sharp features, a face that required attention to appreciate, and that no one in my family had ever cared to give. Cecily was extraordinary in the way a painting is extraordinary. Composed, luminous, designed to be admired from a fixed distance. The difference between us was not nature, it was budget. Cecily had tutors, gowns, dancing masters, a mother who spent hours each morning on her toilette and complexion. I had a library card and Mrs. Hargrove's leftover roast. But I had also developed something Cecily hadn't, through no fault of her own: the ability to see people clearly. When you spend your life watching from the margins, you learn to read the grammar of human behavior, the micro-expressions, the calibrated pauses, the distance between what people say and what they mean. It was this skill, more than anything, that would ruin me. Because the first thing I noticed about Edmund Hale was that he didn't want to be there. He was 34, recently elevated to his father's title after the old Viscount Hale died of a stroke the previous autumn. The viscouncy came with substantial debts, a crumbling estate in Derbyshire, and the urgent expectation that he marry well and quickly. My father, Baron Fairley, had positioned Cecily as the solution. Beautiful, accomplished, and attached to a dowry that my father had been quietly assembling for a decade by neglecting every other financial obligation, including the estate itself. I knew this because I kept the books. I knew exactly how much Cecily's dowry had cost, the deferred repairs, the underpaid tenants, the borrowed sums from increasingly impatient creditors. Fairley Park was a house built on the promise that Cecily would marry magnificently, and that the resulting alliance would paper over years of financial erosion. My father wasn't selling his daughter. He was leveraging her. Edmund stayed for a week. During that week, I watched him from the periphery the way I watched everything. Carefully, hungrily, with the focused attention of someone who had learned that observation was the only form of participation available to her. He was polite to Cecily, attentive without being eager. He complimented the grounds, asked intelligent questions about the estate's history, and said almost nothing about himself. He had a habit of turning conversations back on the other person, which most people interpreted as charm. I recognized it as evasion. On the third evening, I was in the library after dinner, my usual retreat while Cecily entertained in the drawing room, when the door opened and Edmund walked in. He stopped when he saw me, clearly expecting the room to be empty. "Forgive me," he said. "I was looking for something to read. The novels are on the left, the histories on the right." If you want philosophy, you'll need the ladder. He studied me for a moment. You're the other daughter. I'm the other daughter. They don't mention you much. They don't mention me at all. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. I would have hated pity. Curiosity, maybe. The same focused attention I was so used to giving and so unaccustomed to receiving. "What are you reading?" he asked. I held up the ledger I'd been reviewing. Estate accounts, quarterly tenancy review. That's not light reading. It's not meant to be. He crossed to the shelf, selected a volume at random, and sat in the chair across from me. We read in silence for an hour. It was the most intimate experience I'd had with another human being in years, and neither of us said a word. Here is the thing I need to confess, the flaw that would detonate everything. I believed I didn't deserve to want things. Not in a poetic, tragic way, in a practical, structural way. My family had taught me that desire was Cecily's domain. Romantic desire, social desire, the desire to be admired and chosen. My role was to want nothing, need nothing, and to keep the machinery running so that Cecily's wanting could be fulfilled. I had internalized this so completely that when I began to feel something for Edmund, something specific and physical and undeniable, my first instinct was not to pursue it or even to enjoy it. My first instinct was to destroy it. I avoided the library. I took meals in the kitchen exclusively. When Edmund asked my father about the young woman who manages the accounts, my father told him I was a distant relation who helped with clerical matters. I found this out later, and it should have hurt more than it did, but I had been erased so many times that the sting had calcified into something duller and more permanent. Not pain, but the absence of surprise. Edmund found me anyway. On his 5th morning, he came to the kitchen garden where I was arguing with the head gardener about the potato yield. He stood at the gate and listened, and when I finished and turned around, he was smiling. Not at me, exactly, but at something the exchange had confirmed for him. "Your father says you're a distant relation," he said. "My father says a lot of things." "Are you his daughter?" "I am when it's convenient, which is almost never." He leaned against the gate. "Have dinner with us tonight, in the dining room." "I wasn't invited." "I'm inviting you. You're a guest. You don't get to rearrange the household." "Then I'll eat in the kitchen." I stared at him. "You can't eat in the kitchen. You're a viscount." "Watch me." He was being reckless, and I should have stopped him. Instead, I felt something crack open inside my chest. A hairline fracture in the wall I'd spent 26 years constructing. I told him not to cause trouble. He told me he wasn't causing anything. He was simply refusing to participate in an arrangement he found cruel. That was the first time I recognized the contradiction in Edmund that would later nearly break us both. He was a man who loathed injustice, but who had spent his entire adult life benefiting from systems built on it. His outrage was genuine. His complicity was also genuine. And he hadn't yet figured out how to hold both truths at once. That night, he did eat in the kitchen. Mrs. Hargrove served him lamb and roasted turnips on the good china she kept hidden from my mother. And he complimented every bite. And I sat across from him feeling terrified and luminous, like a match that had just been struck. My mother found out by morning. The fallout was surgical. My mother, Lady Fairley, was not a woman who screened or threw objects. She operated through temperature. Coldness so precise it could crack stone. She came to my room before breakfast, closed the door, and stood with her hands folded. "You will not speak to Viscount Hale again," she said. "You will not be in any room where he is present. You will not interfere with your sister's future." "I didn't interfere with anything. He came to me." "Then you will make yourself unavailable, as you have always done, as you were raised to do." The words landed exactly where she aimed them. I felt the old architecture reassert itself. The load-bearing belief that my invisibility was not a punishment, but a function. That the family needed me to be nothing, so that Cecily could be everything. "What if he asks for me?" I said. My mother's expression didn't change. "He won't. Men like him don't choose women like you, Margot. They're intrigued for a moment, and then they remember what they need." She left. I sat on the edge of my bed and pressed my hands flat against my thighs, and told myself she was right. She had always been right. The world was built for Cecily's, and the sooner I accepted that, the less it would hurt. I avoided Edmund for 2 days. He left notes with Mrs. Hargrove. I didn't read them. On his final evening at Fairley Park, my father hosted a dinner. Local families were invited. The Aldridges, the Penningtons, the Darcourts. All of them aware that this was an exhibition, a soft announcement that Cecily Fairley would soon be Viscountess Hale. Cecily wore ivory silk. My father gave a toast about legacy and union. Edmund sat at the head of the table and said all the appropriate things in all the appropriate ways, and I watched from the upstairs landing through the banister rails like a child. Then Edmund stood and addressed the room. "I'm grateful for Baron Fairley's hospitality," he said, "and I want to be honest with this company, because I've been told that honesty is the foundation of any worthy alliance." The room went still. "I came here expecting to court Lady Cecily. She is accomplished, gracious, and everything her parents have prepared her to be. But during my stay, I've come to know another member of this household, one who has been deliberately hidden from me, and from every guest who has ever visited this house." My father's wineglass stopped halfway to his mouth. "I'm speaking of Miss Margaret Fairley, the Baron's younger daughter, who manages this estate's accounts, oversees its tenancies, and has been treated not as a daughter of this house, but as unpaid labor." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I gripped the banister so hard my knuckles went white. Cecily's face drained of color. My mother rose from her chair as though pulled by a string. "Your lordship," my father said, his voice strangled. "This is hardly—" "I would like to court Margot," Edmund said, "if she'll have me, and I wanted this family, and this company, to know it plainly." He had ruined me. I know that sounds paradoxical. A viscount publicly declaring his interest should have been a triumph. But Edmund, in his righteous fury, had detonated the only structure I knew how to live inside. Within an hour of his announcement, 3 things happened. My father pulled me into his study and told me I was no longer welcome at Fairley Park. Cecily locked herself in her room and refused to speak to anyone. And my mother told the Aldridges and the Penningtons that I had been manipulating the Viscount through inappropriate private meetings. The whisper network activated instantly. By the next morning, every family within 20 miles had heard some version of the story. The invisible Fairley daughter had schemed to steal her sister's match through seduction, deception, or both. The truth, that Edmund had chosen me of his own volition, was far less interesting than the fiction. Edmund, to his credit, was horrified by the consequences. He hadn't anticipated that his grand gesture would make me a pariah rather than a heroine. He'd seen injustice and attacked it the only way he knew how. Publicly, dramatically, without considering that the person he was trying to save might be crushed by the debris. "I thought if people knew the truth," he said. We were standing in the stable yard, his carriage loaded, his valet waiting. "I thought it would help." "You thought about what felt right to you," I said. "You didn't think about what would happen to me." He flinched. "Margot, you get to leave. You go back to Derbyshire, and you're a viscount who made an unconventional choice. Eccentric, maybe. Romantic, even. I stay here, and I'm the schemer who destroyed her sister's prospects." Then come with me. I can't come with you. I've known you for a week. You know me better than anyone in that house knows you. That was true. And the truth of it was the most painful part. Because what Edmund was offering, escape, recognition, love even, required me to leap across a gap I'd spent my whole life being told I couldn't cross. And the voice in my head, the one my mother had installed and maintained for 26 years, whispered, "You don't get to have this. This isn't for you." "Go home," I said. "If you still want to write to me in a month, then write." He looked at me for a long time. Then he climbed into the carriage. The month that followed was the worst of my life. My father removed me from all estate responsibilities and gave them to a hired steward who, within 3 weeks, made errors I could see from across the room. Cecily wouldn't look at me. My mother treated me with a silence so total it felt like a physical substance, like fog filling every room I entered. The Pennington daughters crossed the street when they saw me in the village. Mrs. Hargrove smuggled me food and news, and once a handkerchief, when she found me crying in the root cellar. Edmund wrote after 2 weeks, not 4. His letter was careful, measured, nothing like his reckless announcement. He described his estate. He described its debts, honestly, without self-pity. He described the library, which needed cataloguing, and the tenancy records, which were in disorder, and the accounts, which hadn't been properly kept in years. He described, in other words, a life where my skills would matter, where I would matter. He also wrote this: "I know what I did at that dinner was selfish. I told myself it was brave, but bravery that costs someone else more than it costs you is just another form of control. I am trying to learn the difference. I don't know if I've earned the right to ask you for anything, but I'm asking anyway. Will you write back?" Asterisk. I wrote back. I told him about the steward's errors. I told him about the isolation. I told him, and this was harder, about the part of me that believed my mother was right, that I was built for service and shadow, and that wanting more was a kind of theft. His response was not reassuring. It was honest. "I can't promise I won't make selfish decisions again. I can promise I'll tell you when I'm making them. And I can promise that if you come to Derbyshire, you'll never eat in the kitchen unless you want to." I left Fairley Park on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying one trunk and a letter from my father, informing me that I was no longer considered a member of the family for purposes of inheritance, introduction, or correspondence. Cecily appeared at my bedroom door the night before, the first time she'd spoken to me in 6 weeks. "You know this isn't just about him," she said. Her voice was flat, exhausted. "You know what this costs me." "I know." "Father's already looking for another match. Someone older. Someone who won't care that I was passed over publicly. Do you understand what that means for me?" I did understand. Cecily's currency had been devalued in the only market our father knew how to operate in, and the consequences would follow her for years. I felt the weight of that. Not guilt, exactly, but the heavy awareness that my happiness and her suffering were now permanently entangled. 2 figures on opposite ends of the same lever. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it, though I knew it wasn't enough. "Don't be sorry," Cecily said. "Just don't pretend this was free." Derbyshire was not a fairy tale. The estate, Hale Court, was beautiful in the way that aging things are beautiful. Grand bones showing through decades of neglect. The debts were worse than Edmund had described. The tenants were wary of a new viscountess who had arrived under scandal. The local gentry had heard the Fairley story and treated me with a politeness so brittle I could hear it cracking at every dinner party. Edmund and I argued constantly in those first months. Not about the estate. On that we were aligned. Two people who understood that survival required honesty about numbers, but about everything else. He wanted to introduce me to the county as his equal. I kept retreating into the old patterns, managing from the background, refusing to sit at the head of the table, deferring to him in company and then resenting him for it in private. "You asked me to see you," he said one evening, after I'd spent a dinner party deflecting every compliment and redirecting every conversation to him. "And now that I do, you keep trying to disappear. Because every time I'm visible, something breaks." "Nothing is breaking, Margot. Your mother won't speak to you. The Aldridge family withdrew their investment in your drainage project. The rector's wife told Mrs. Hargrove I bewitched you. Those are their choices, not your fault. But they're your consequences, and you keep paying them because of me." He stood very still. "Are you asking me if I regret this?" The question hung between us. I wanted to say no, but the honest answer was worse. "I'm asking if you should." He crossed the room. Not quickly, deliberately, the way he did everything when it mattered. He stopped close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. Close enough that the distance between us was no longer an abstraction, but a physical thing. Bridgeable. Terrifying. Real. "I regret how I did it," he said quietly. "I regret the dinner, the spectacle, the arrogance of thinking I could fix your family by shaming them. I regret every consequence that fell on you instead of me. But I do not." His voice caught, just slightly. The first crack I'd ever heard in his composure. "I do not regret choosing you. And I need you to stop waiting for me to." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed the way it used to close in my father's study, my mother's doorway, every room where I'd been told I was less than. "I don't know how to stop," I whispered. "I know," he said. "I know you don't. But I'm asking you to try." His hand came up and rested against the side of my face, not pulling me forward, just holding still, giving me the choice. I turned my cheek into his palm and closed my eyes and let myself feel. For one unguarded moment, the full weight of being wanted by someone who knew exactly what it was costing him. Recovery was not linear. There were weeks when I managed the estate with confidence and authority, and felt, for the first time, like the person I might have been if anyone had ever given me the chance. There were weeks when I retreated to the library and wouldn't come out, when the old voice returned. "You don't deserve this. This isn't yours. This will be taken away." And Edmund would sit outside the door, not pushing, not demanding, just present. He had his own reckonings. His mother, the Dowager Viscountess, arrived in January and spent 3 weeks making her disapproval known through a campaign of quiet devastation. Rearranging the household, overriding my decisions with the staff, referring to me as the Fairly girl in company. Edmund confronted her, and the resulting argument ended with her departure and a silence between mother and son that lasted, by my count, nearly 5 months. "She'll come around," I said, though I wasn't sure. "She might not," he said, "and I've decided that's acceptable." But I saw what it cost him. The tightness around his eyes when letters arrived from Derbyshire acquaintances who sided with his mother. The careful way he avoided mentioning her in conversation. The quiet grief of choosing love over the family that raised you. I knew that grief. I lived inside it. Spring came. The drainage project resumed with new investors. The tenants began to trust me after I reorganized the lease terms and reduced 3 families' rents during a difficult lambing season. Cecily wrote once, a short letter, formal, informing me that she was engaged to a widower in Kent. She did not congratulate me. She did not condemn me. The letter ended, "I hope it was worth it." I put the letter in my desk drawer and sat with the question for a long time. Was it worth it? The estrangement from my family, the whispers, the dowager's hostility, the nights when I still woke up believing I'd stolen something that wasn't mine. I didn't have an answer. I'm not sure I ever will. What I had instead was a life that finally had my name on it. Imperfect, contested, built on ground that had cost us both more than either of us expected to pay. On a warm evening in April, Edmund found me in the kitchen garden. I was on my knees again, dirt under my fingernails, a streak of something across my forehead. Some things don't change. The accounts are balanced, I said without looking up. We'll break even by September if the wool prices hold. Margot. And the east roof needs patching before autumn, but I think we can manage it if we defer the stable repairs. Margot. I looked up.
He was smiling. Not his public smile, not his polite smile, but the one I'd first seen in the kitchen with Mrs. Hargrove's lamb. The one that meant he was seeing something that made the rest of the world go quiet. What? Nothing, he said. I just wanted to look at you. I sat back on my heels, mud-stained and sunburned and entirely myself, and I let him look. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a Tuesday. The roof still leaked. His mother still hadn't written. My family still considered me dead. The neighbors still whispered. But the garden was producing, and the books were balanced. And somewhere in a house that was slowly becoming ours, there was a chair by the library fire, with my name worn into the cushion, and a man who had upended his life to sit across from me, and a future that was uncertain and imperfect, and, for the first time in my 27 years, entirely mine. I went back to my potatoes. Edmund sat on the garden wall and read aloud from a letter about sheep husbandry. And the sun moved slowly across the Derbyshire hills, and nothing was resolved, and nothing was finished, and that was enough.